The most famous border reaver of them all, William Armstrong of Kinmont. His story starts sat looking across at the stark stone walls of a Scottish jail cell. With a long and violent charge sheet, he'd be classed as a double category A prisoner today, and he certainly learned how to do hard time during his several incarcerations. William Armstrong in Morton Tower, better known as Kinmont Willie, became a legend of the Anglo-Scottish border reaver fraternity after being famously broken out of captivity from Carlisle Castle in 1596. His notoriety as a villain was secured much earlier, and he first appears in the records in 1569. And Alexander Jardine was to stand as surety for William Graham to Armstrong of Kinmont, but was discharged as all bands of entering true Scotsmen to thieves were discharged by proclamation. Just a month earlier, Will and his brothers Christy and Ninian were to be held in St Andrew's Castle as a great number of Liddesdale riders were detained as pledges by Lord Maxwell to keep the Scottish peace. Will was stood as a pledge for himself and his branch of the Armstrong family. Pledges were hostages taken and locked up to dissuade other members of their crime families from committing further offences. It didn't work. Kinmont's brothers Archie and Fergie were put to the horn, that is, declared outlaws, in April 1574. They and their unnamed accomplices had undertaken a moonlit burglary on a house of Thomas Johnson of Craigieburns at Failfoot. They lifted all of the insight, goods and gear, and also took 2 horses and mares. Just 5 nights later, the same gang raided Smailgills and took 6 horses and mare, broke into 5 houses and ransacked them, and left 80 Coddy for dead in a pool of his own blood. As the brothers were Will's responsibility under the terms of his pledging, he'll have been far from impressed that they got caught. Will's son George had been stood as surety on a different matter the year previous, and Kinmont was one of a number of Armstrongs, and 2 Beatties and 2 Elliots, who received close writings from my Lord Regent's Grace on behalf of the young King James VI in 1576. 4 years later, Kinmont stood again answerable for himself and all persons in a bill that wanted to put an end to all deadly feuds, quarrels, questions and controversies standing between him and the Knight Thomas Turnbull of Bedrule and others of the surname Turnbull. He was one of the leaders of 2 well-documented full-scale raids, one into Tynedale in Northumberland in 1583 and again the following year when they hit the Tarset. His marriage to a daughter of the notorious English West March reaver Hutchin Graham made Will valuable to the March officials as a bargaining chip, and that year Lord Scroop had unsuccessfully attempted to exchange Walter Graham and Robert Graham of the Fold for Kinmont and his son Jock as prisoners. Kinmont was a tenant and follower of Lord Maxwell and was named along with his sons John, George, Francis, Tom, Sandy, another John and Rinian in the West March Warden's muster roll for his assault and siege on Stirling Castle in 1585. He and his gang, named Kinmont's Bairns, had also done a great reef of horses and goods. When you add in Kinmont's involvement in 6 unanswered bills of complaint for massive raids into Northumberland at Hayden Bridge, Featherstone Half, Biddleston, Prendykes, Thornburn and Mindrum in early 1587, he was heading for big trouble with the Scottish crown. When Mary, Queen of Scots, was executed that month, the Protestant powers that be were keen to subdue Catholics like Maxwell, and the 1587 Act for quieting and keeping in obedience of the disordered subjects inhabitants of the borders, highlands and isles was an attempt to bring them under control. That act was being cited again in 1590 as Alexander Jardine of Applegarth complained that the Kinmont Armstrongs and many Scotsmen and Englishmen came to his lands at Drift and took 100 cattle and 6 horses in a violent raid that left Jordan himself severely wounded. Maxwell was charged with bringing the offenders to face justice at the toll booth in Edinburgh, as he was their landlord, and Willie was again demanded as a principal of the clan and branch, along with Ninian Armstrong of Auchenbedrig, George Armstrong in Catgill, Sim Graham of Logan, and Fergie Armstrong in Kirkhead. Even more seriously, the Scottish Crown were demanding that Kinmont and numerous others inhabiting the land around the debatable ground in Canterbury make official claims on their land in proclamations from the market crosses of Edinburgh and Dumfries. With just snippets appearing in the published records, it is hard to keep up with the and imagine the full extent of the criminal career of Kinmont. But Willie mutilated a man called Roger Bullman of Scaleby in a raid, where he also lifted 13 cattle and 2 horses with young Christy Armstrong of Barngleash, Tom Armstrong of Roundburn, and others in 1592. Soon after, he took Walter Calvary of Hull Colton prisoner, stole 3 of his horses, and took a gold chain, jewels, gold, silver, and writings and household stuff, and a 30-strong gang, including Kinmont's Jock and Christy of Barngleash. They used the same modus operandi to take Robert Twentyman of Orton hostage for ransom after breaking into his mansion house and taking 28 cattle, 4 horses, and ransacking the property. Kinmont was involved in another 1,000-strong day foray into Tynedale that year, and although he appeared before the Scottish King with some other principal men, English official John Foster complained that nothing had been done. The following December, Lord Scrope wrote to William Cecil that he was seeking an insurance with Kinmont, who he described erroneously as the chief of the Armstrongs of Scotland, who was a great clan or surname, and such as have and may great outrage Her Majesty's subjects. Perhaps Scrope was attempting to alleviate his own profile with the Queen's chief adviser by putting Kinmont ahead of the Laird of Mangerton, or maybe he'd received the wrong intelligence. But whatever his intention, it certainly put Kinmont directly in the firing line of the English West March Warden. Willie's unlawful arrest by Scrope's deputy as he rode from a truce day at Curzip Foot, and subsequent breakout from Carlisle Castle, masterminded by the Liddesdale keeper Walter Scott of Buccleuch, is legendary due to the ballad that was penned about it, and the story remains an important part of border folklore. But that certainly wasn't that for Kinmont Willie Armstrong. The gang he was riding with attacked the Ricker Gate in Carlisle one night in March 1600, causing confusion and panic. 300 Johnsons, Armstrongs, Bells, Beatties, Irvins and others had ridden a day foray on the Newton of Irvington and Cammack, where they burned houses, barns, corn and property, lifting 40 cattle and 60 sheep, taking prisoners and mutilating other people. On their way back that night, around 140 of the gang hit Scotby just outside Carlisle, where they started fires, took prisoners and stole a further 60 cattle and 50 horses. They then rode down into the city itself and broke and cut up the posts that held the iron chains for the Eden Bridge, grabbed more hostages, smashed up doors, then rode up to the city walls near the castle, shouting and bawling as the beacon there was set alight to warn the wardenry. Some of those involved were named as Christy Armstrong of Barngleash, Davy, Will and Geordie Kang Irvin, and Kinmont himself. 4 months later, Kinmont bought a horse that had been stolen from Thomas Sanford of Howgill and was seen riding upon it by Richard Lowther, while in the August of 1601 he was accused, along with Mangat and Whithaff, of taking blackmail from the people of Agnes Well in the parish of Scaleby and hanging around for bad purposes after their relation John Will's Jog Graham had moved into the area. Willie was back in prison by the November of 1602 at the toll booth in Edinburgh until other pledges for the gang of Kinmont, any two of Geordie's son Christy or his brother Sandy, were received on the 1st of January. While Kinmont was being held in a jail, whose doorway is marked today by the heart of Midlothian, hence the spitting tradition, Scrope twice raided his house looking for outlaws. He reckoned in the January of 1603 that since his release Kinmont had raided the 2 towns of Heskett. It then seems highly likely that when Queen Elizabeth I of England died just 2 months later, he will have been involved in the invasion of Cumberland known as Busy or Ill Week that followed. Kinmont's brother-in-law, young Hutchin Graham, was one of the leaders of the raiding parties of Grahams and Armstrongs primarily that hit the countryside hard for plunder, as they reckoned that they believed that the laws of the land were suspended when a monarch died. Of course they did. But Elizabeth's death and the crowning of the Scottish King James VI in England marked a period of intense uncertainty for the crime families of the borders, as the political powers clamped down on their reign of corruption, terror, crime and intimidation, with hangings, drownings, brandings and banishing in a new order of law superseded their archaic march laws. In the April of 1605, 29 out of the 33 people, 8 being Scottish and the rest English, being held as condemned prisoners of the Border Commission under the Earl of Cumberland, broke the jail at Carlisle Castle and escaped. 7 were Armstrongs of Kinmont and 5 were Grahams. The Armstrongs fled back over the border into Scotland, where the likes of young Hutchin Graham were avoiding being sent to Ireland by hiding out. Kinmont Willie's nephew William, the son of his brother Jock, was definitely one of the escapees. In October 1606, a Jon Armstrong who had flitted to Hexham was pardoned for robbery done in the busy week. Whether Willie met with jet justice for his part in those raids, fled to Ireland himself, or died in his bed as tradition maintains, it is unclear. Documents as yet unpublished and untranscribed in the archives may yet shed further light on what actually happened to the celebrated gangster. What is known is that Francis Armstrong of Kinmont was booted off the lands at Mungbyhurst after Walter Scott of Tushielaw, of all people, complained to the king that his neighbour was using violence and a strong hand to try and remain after being lawfully removed for a first time in 1611 as the power of the family waned. Just 4 years before, the same Scott of Tushielaw, along with Francis and other Armstrongs, including Blanche Irvine, the widow of Kinmont's then dead son young William of Kinmont in Morton Tower, had violently impeded the king's men James Maxwell and Robert Douglas as he attempted to survey the former debatable lands. If young William was occupying the tower before his death in 1607, you'd have to surmise that his father was possibly dead before then also. The time frame fits ominously with the so-called pacification of the border, when retributions could be swift, brutal, and, to be honest, unofficial. Plenty will have wanted Kinmont Will gone, and claiming justice for the busy week raids provided a viable excuse to do him in. Although the times had changed, in 1642 there were 4 instantly recognisable names among a list of fugitives from justice issued to be brought to justice in Dumfries and Jedburgh. John of Sark Kinmont and his brother William of Kinmont, James of Kinmont and John Perknow Kinmont Armstrong were all wanted men. While as late as 1679, 2 notorious border thieves were captured across an island and deported back to face justice. The names were Ludovic Irvine and George Armstrong of Kinmont. Perhaps he'd be proud of them, but Willie could scarce have known that he'd still live on himself in legend more than 400 years later.